HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Road to Delano by John Desimone. Read by Ramon de Ocampo. Sugar. 1933. Sugar Duncan was known around Lamoille County as a gambler who could farm. But Sugar called himself a farmer who understood a sure bet. He grew up a plowboy on a hard-scrabble patch of Vermont hill country and had calluses before he knew he had brains. It was in the 7th grade, in Pete Colburn's barn, waiting out a driving rain, that he found his power. While playing 7-card stud, he could see the patterns. He understood the odds. He lived by the bluff, and he lived well, as far as a child of the Depression could. Before he reached high school, they were calling him Sugar because he was sweet about taking their money. While his college buddies baled hay and slopped pigs to pay their way through ag school at Vermont U, Sugar found it more profitable to relieve the hooligans and rum-runners of their easy fortunes at the card table above Markham's Grill over in Providence. After 4 years of playing cards and a new degree, he left town to farm where the land hadn't been wiped clean of its strength. Sugar rode west to California's Central Valley in a Pullman with a pair of tan and white brogues stuffed with cash packed in the bottom of his steamer. FDR had just signed the Cullen-Harrison Act, ending Prohibition, and a fifth of whiskey was now as cheap as an acre of California farmland. He hadn't any choice. Returning to Vermont would mean he'd starve. With gasoline a luxury, his father had resorted to using mules to plow his 100 acres. Milk and corn prices had fallen so sharply, a farmer could live better by killing his cows than by selling their milk. California was the place he could make a living, and he intended to make that living as a farmer. Eventually. A couple of weeks after arriving in Frisco, Sugar stood on the running board of a dusty Model T on the road leading into Delano, and surveyed the flatlands of the valley planted in golden September wheat. He removed his hat, wiped his brow with the sleeve of his seersucker suit, and his instinct told him there was a sure bet. He ensconced himself in the Fremont Hotel on Nob Hill. Each night around 6, he made his way downstairs to a back room, where he took up residence with a fresh deck of cards and a new bottle of Jim Beam, thankfully back in production, and waited. It didn't take long for his table to fill. About a year later, he bought his first section of land. On a mission to see an angel, Sugar debarked the Nob Hill trolley at Taylor in California on a foggy Sunday morning, after a long night of wagers and bluffs. Grace Cathedral's carillon was in full melodic stride, pounding out a hymn he hadn't heard in years. He paused midway up the ascending concrete steps, the tip of its campanile obscured in thick fog, trying to recollect its name. He'd not heard that song since he'd left the Methodist church as a teen. The Methodists didn't have bells that could sing like this stone and stained-glass beauty now emerging from the mist of the rising morning. Neither did Methodists take kindly to boys who gambled. The crowd swelled up and carried him along in a cavalcade of San Francisco's best citizens in their finest clothes. The building itself was a monument to European Gothic, with soaring stained-glass windows, buttresses, candelabras of beaten silver, and hard oak pews. Striding down the wide center aisle, he nodded at several men he'd become acquainted with in the back room of the Fremont. The altar was a majestic slab of marble, adorned with satin cloth and golden candlesticks. 3 stained-glass Palladian windows rose 4 stories behind it. In the warm umbra of the early light, he waited to see for himself what Mr. Dalton, a colleague in cards, had meant by angels appearing during the service. Not that he disbelieved in the possibility of divine intervention, he just wanted to witness it for himself. The choir assembled in a rustle of white robes trimmed with red satin stoles. According to the order of service, they began with Jesu meine Freude, and while it wasn't ordinary, it wasn't angelic to Sugar's taste. At least, not in the way Dalton had described a divine manifestation. At the refrain, a raven-haired singer stepped forward. A few light steps, and she settled in a sliver of light from above. The choir hushed. The congregation quit their fidgeting. She lifted her voice, and something inside him ascended along with her, sweeping him up, so even the German lyrics took on a secret meaning. The importance of the lyrics, magnified by her conviction, a message from God, undecipherable, but absolutely true. Her music expanded to fill every cubit of the vault. When she finished, the quietness of the miraculous settled over the congregation, a hushed moment of wonder. She melded back into the white-clad choir. A part of Sugar refused to return, still soaring high, shiny, and lit by the sun. He perused the order of service again. Soloist, Miss Shirley Gray. Now here was a dark-haired angel he had to meet. Shortly after purchasing his fourth section, Sugar drove his shiny black Model A back along the road to Delano, with a lovely and satisfied Miss Shirley Gray bundled in the seat next to him. She wore a white cotton dress in the new style, almost to her knees, and a silk scarf to tamp her beautiful black hair down against the sweep of dry valley air rushing across the flatlands. And she had the long, slender fingers of a pianist, the daintiest of hands that Sugar desperately wanted to hold in his. Sugar parked along the shoulder of the dusty county road. He helped her out, then led her through the scrub and mesquite. Not a tall man, but neither was he short. He had the build and stride of a man who had worked the land, though his hands had gone soft from playing cards. His black hair was swept back under a new fedora, and he was dressed in a new Brooks Brothers suit, with a pleat cut to the pants and two-toned white and tan Oxfords. Shirley picked her way, slipping her slender legs through gaps in the brush. With dainty steps, she skirted the holes and dips. Not far off the road, they stopped on a gentle rise to survey the sparse landscape in silent awe. His suit jacket flapped in the breeze. Water in Spring Gulch that cut across the southwest corner glistened blue in the brightness. The sky appeared so translucent he considered the possibility of seeing straight through to heaven. She pushed her hair under her scarf and had to work to keep her skirt from flying up. Her hand shielded her dazzled eyes. She turned full around, taking in the flat expanse, and let out a low sigh. "This would be a nice place to build a house," Sugar said. "A farmhouse?" He turned to her. "Why a farmhouse?" She couldn't conceal her smile. "I always wanted to marry a farmer and live on a farm." Her cheeks now blushed. He took up her hand in his, fresh and light, the skin of her palm as smooth as a baby's face. "What about marrying a gambler?" "Never." She stepped away, letting his hand go before he could read her eyes. For all of his acumen in divining the facial expressions of card players, he was at a loss to understand the game she was playing. Driving home, he thought of explaining his view of gambling and farming, how they both entailed managing risks, calculating odds, and the subtle art of placing a bet. But she'd already revealed her hand. She would marry a farmer. He realized then that if she had said she dreamed of marrying a gambler, he would have no use for her. He had every intention of playing his last game. Soon. He just needed a better stake. A few days later, Sugar visited the offices of Collette & Sons and signed a contract to build an impressive Victorian home on the site that had made Miss Shirley Gray sigh with undeniable pleasure. Something like the grand mansions that stood on Nob Hill, he told Old Man Collette, who listened while stroking his heroic mustache. Mr. Collette built the 3-story Victorian with 2 turrets, gabled roof with dormers, and a wide veranda on the rise Shirley had enjoyed, in the southeast corner where Spring Gulch swept by. A natural spring ran in a culvert fronting his acreage, bequeathing the riparian land rights. In March of '39, he escorted the new Mrs. Shirley Duncan down the aisle of Grace Episcopal Cathedral. Descending through the gauntlet of rice to their waiting Cadillac, he now owned 4,000 acres of the most fecund soil west of the Mississippi. When he proposed to her, she had reminded him that she wouldn't tolerate any more gambling. He sealed the deal with a promise that he had played his last card game and would plant his land that spring. So, the year before their wedding, he had planted all his land in Durham wheat. When Sugar wasn't watching his supervisor, Isidro Sanchez, work a crew of men plowing in John Deere tractors from an hour before dawn until an hour after sunset, he spent time in his farm office on the second floor, planning and figuring. Across from his office, Shirley set up her sewing room with a new Singer machine her mother gave her as a wedding gift. When she wasn't sewing dresses and shirts, or a new buckskin jacket for Sugar, she played her Steinway Grand in the parlor, running through Chopin and Schubert. In the late afternoon, Sugar would lean against the doorway in the hall, one foot across the other, his planter's hat askew on his head, like a man on the hunt. She'd break into a high-fevered Benny Goodman, or his favorite jazz piece, and he'd sit close by, tapping his foot to the time and smiling like a man who'd eaten ice cream his whole life and was better for it. In the evening, when the heat had dried out every ounce of a man's efforts, Sugar took Shirley's hand and led her into the parlor and stacked their favorite albums on the phonograph. The sound of jazz and swing filled the house. They foxtrotted across the floor, their bodies swinging and pulsing to the beat. Her scent a promise of her treasure. Sugar held her close as a certainty against all the uncertainties, and they kissed in the vanilla moonlight that streamed in through the tall windows, her slimness against his, warm and powerful and urgent. One day, Shirley brought coffee on a silver serving tray up to his office. She wore a new spring dress, white with purple violets splashed across it from the hem to the collar, one she made herself. Sugar introduced her to a well-dressed man with slicked-back hair, black as coal. He rose when she entered, a tan planter's hat in his hand. She set the coffee service down on a Queen Anne side table and poured 2 cups, and took one to her guest. Both of the men stood. "Shirley, this is Herm Gordon." Herm held out his hand. "Nice to meet you, Mrs. Duncan. Sugar's told me a lot about you." "And what do you do?" "I'm with Lacey's farm equipment," he said, while fingering the brim of his hat. "Herm says they're coming out with a new combine that'll harvest 50 acres an hour," Sugar said. "You say so," she said. 3 times faster than what we have now," Sugar said. "You say so." She handed him the cup and saucer. He took the coffee. "I do," Herm said, a broad smile on his face. "Do you take sugar, Mr. Gordon? Or cream?" She motioned toward the tray. "No, thank you. I always drink mine black." He stirred the coffee with a silver teaspoon, tapped the rim once, and set it on the saucer. "Herm's been selling farm equipment in the valley for years. He's seen it all. He thinks our place will be one of the most productive around." She handed Sugar his cup and saucer and looked over the salesman one more time. "Yes, ma'am," Herm nodded. "Usually farmers aren't too friendly to new ways, but not Sugar." "You look way too young to have seen that many harvests, Mr. Gordon." Herm smiled, and 2 dimples formed in the center of his cheeks, both fired with a flash of blush. "Good food and fresh air. It keeps me young." "Herm also said we might look into planting grapes. There's a trade group over in Delano that's made up mostly of grape growers. He thinks I should join." "You think so, Mr. Gordon?" she said. "Grapes are the biggest cash crop. It's the future of Delano, as long as labor's so cheap and we get the water." Sugar set his cup down and looked at her inquisitively, as if wondering what she would say. "Well," Shirley said, touching her throat, "then maybe we should plant some grapes." "A couple 100 acres in the east sector to start." Sugar pointed toward the large plat mat on the wall. Herm nodded, and Sugar smiled, and he asked her to sit with them as they talked of hardiness and climate and varieties. Sugar favored wine grapes, Herm table grapes. "I love Thompson's seedless," Shirley said. "I could eat those forever." The men gave each other knowing looks. "Well then, let's start with Thompson's," Sugar said. Sugar prospered during the war years because everything that could be eaten was in high demand. The U.S. military coveted his high-protein durum, and his land had the highest yields an acre of any in the valley. Shirley took advantage of the good years and had a half-acre set aside behind the house. She reminded Sugar she didn't want any planting up to the porches just to maximize the yields. He had a wooden fence built around her parcel where she planted a garden. Shirley, in her woven sun hat and pedal pushers, she laid out neat rows of vegetables and flowers, and she purchased seedlings for apricot, peach, and orange trees. And in the heart of the garden she built a grape arbor, cool and shady, where she often rested from the afternoon heat. Around the oak in the front yard she sowed Bermuda grass that would take the heat and wear of the large family she and Sugar were working on, but that hadn't taken root yet. Soon the tree would spread its thick limbs, and she'd hang a swing from it and rock her boys in the silent rhythms of the Central Valley breezes. The year the Sears and Roebuck opened in town, Shirley bought a brand-new Singer sewing machine, one that could do 30 different stitches and had a foot pedal. She enlarged her sewing room on the second floor by taking over a second bedroom and turned out dresses and shirts for farmers' wives who came to the house to be measured and choose patterns. It seemed every few days she had a new dress. Winter dresses with heavy fabrics, spring dresses white with flowers, bright summer dresses, light and swishy, and autumn always brought out the burnt oranges and browns. She sewed dresses to dine in, to dance in, and to listen to music in, and practical dresses to work in, which had all the elegance of the city, but with large pockets for gloves and scissors and trimmers and small spades. Shirley didn't like the cars being covered in dust from the wind that blasted from the foothills, so Sugar built a car barn on the east side of the house, in the same style of the 3-story Victorian. They painted it tan with dark brown trim to match the house, whose 2 turrets, dormer windows, slender brick chimneys, and peaked roofs with gingerbread trim rose 3 stories above the parched brown fields, a castle on an isolated plain. In the years after the war life settled in for them, and Sugar sold every bushel he grew, by 1950, Sugar's first table grape harvest had grown to 200 acres, and he knew the future was in grapes. Prior years, he'd sold to vineyards, where the picking and packing didn't matter. But table grapes were different. Appearance and sweetness were as important as price, and table grapes cost 3 times what vineyards paid. Some of what he knew about grapes he learned at the dinner table. Shirley would only set her table with grapes that were the sweetest tasting, had a consistent golden hue, and had the fewest marks of rot and pests. If he could please her, he could satisfy any woman in America. His Thompsons pleased her immensely. "It's like eating raindrops coated with sugar," she said one night at dinner, after plucking a few damp golden grapes from a bowl. There was a sweet satisfaction that ran across her smile that traveled right up into a happy squint in her eyes. If he could grow the best grapes in the Central Valley with his own brand, he could ship them all over the world. But he'd need a completely new way of farming. The work and cost to convert his land would stretch every financial resource. He'd have to do it soon, because wheat just didn't bring the profit it once had. Though anything a man planted around Delano seemed to grow taller and thicker than in other parts, Shirley didn't get pregnant until early 1950. One evening, both of them sat in the parlor, after she'd learned she was expecting their first child, listening to Benny Goodman on their Vitrola, when the announcer broke in. Shirley crocheted. Sugar read a book. They both set down their work at the sound of President Truman's voice. The president spoke in a grave tone, one that matched his declaration of a national emergency because of the North Korean Communists' attack on peaceful South Korea. He had considered using an atomic bomb to stop them. Shirley stifled a gasp. "An atom bomb," she said, shaking her head. "Again." Sugar shushed her with a hand, and he bent to the radio. She pursed her lips and listened. "He's sending MacArthur to kick them damn communists' butts," Sugar said, when the radio address finished. "But a nuclear bomb, honey? If he used it, the whole world would be in flames again." Sugar smirked at the sly grin that crept across her face. "See? Already you understand the difficulty communist subversives would have in our own community," he said. "We got MacArthur on our flank, ready to reap havoc, Truman in D.C. ready to drop the A-bomb, and the mothers of America protecting our farms. Those dirty Reds can't win for nothing." She laughed and held out her hand, and he took it. She drew him toward her, and placed his warm palm on her stomach, and went back to crocheting. "We'll soon have more to think about ourselves." Comfortable beside her, Sugar felt warm with that consideration. Later that year, she delivered a 7-pound, 4-ounce boy on the 3rd of December around midnight, as the silvery moon rose full over the land. She wanted to name him Jack, after her grandfather, but Sugar wanted Paul. "Paul? You don't have any relative named Paul." "I like Paul. It's from the Bible." She looked at him, her head askance. "I know that." "I spent a lot of time reading the Bible when I was younger. It's a good book." The baby made one of those sucking noises that distracted both of them. Shirley pulled him away and gently held him while Sugar placed a cloth diaper on her shoulder. She settled the boy on the white square and lightly tapped his back. After he burped, she held his tiny body in front of her. "I think he looks like Jack. But then I can see Paul, too." Sugar brushed at a tiny wisp of hair on his head. "You're right about that. He's going to be a man among men, well trained in the ways of the land." After all the baby's noises ended, she held him under his arms and lifted him high in the air, letting his little feet dangle. "Well, then, how do you do, Mr. Paul Jack Duncan? Welcome to Duncan Farms." Sugar smiled and touched her cheek with the back of his hand. Sugar and Shirley soon began calling their son Jack. Like his father, he took to the details of farming. One cold morning after the final wheat harvest, Jack rode the tractor with Isidro as he prepared the land for planting grapes. Year-old vines were stored in their canisters on the north side of the ranch. When spring warmed the air, they would begin planting. Jack rose early during that spring planting to watch the men loading the young plants on flat trailers before leaving for the fields. Rising early became second nature to him, like every good farmer. Before school, he fed the chickens in the small coop his mother built behind the car barn, and brought in fresh eggs before catching the bus on the county road. Summer evenings, with the land resting in the heat, the family would sit out on the large porch that wrapped around the front and side of the house. They watched the fireflies light up the night air and listened to the croaking of tree frogs under the starlight, while they drank sweet lemonade squeezed from the fruit grown in Shirley's own garden. Sugar told jokes and stories as the three of them rocked back and forth on the porch swing. Jack squished between them like a ripe watermelon aching to break open, while they swirled away the still evenings. The year Jack turned 8, just after the grape harvest, Shirley sat at the kitchen table, one hand on her stomach, the other over her mouth, a glass bowl on the table in front of her. Jack brought her a glass of water and set it on the table. Jack was hoping for a baby brother. She told him they wanted so many more brothers and sisters, but it had been hard for her to get pregnant. The doctor had advised extra caution, afraid she would miscarry as she had before. So she decided to stay home when Dad went to the annual association meeting in San Francisco where he'd been invited to speak. On that Friday in November, after Dad turned out of the driveway on his way to Frisco, the phone calls started up again. They'd changed their number 3 times over the past year and a half. Each time the calls would stop for a while, then a month or so later start up again. Every time the phone jangled in the hall or the kitchen, Shirley would sit up real straight and get this far-off look in her eyes, as if she already heard what was being said on the line. She never told him who called or what they wanted, but Jack knew they disturbed her. Dad never said that much about them either. But one night, after Jack went to bed, when they thought he was asleep, he could hear the two of them up late, talking about something. There was a sternness in their voices, so he knew it was something important. At times, they argued. Then it would be quiet till the deep darkness of the morning. The phone would ring again, and between each metal jangle, the house took on a vacant silence. He imagined his parents, lying awake down the hall, staring into the darkness, holding their breaths, hoping it would stop. But it kept on. Then they would stop for a time, and they all breathed a sigh that maybe whatever had caused them to ring in the first place had passed by them. Friday evening, Jack ran to answer it in the kitchen, but she called to him. He pulled up short, wishing he could lift the receiver to hear that voice. Maybe he might recognize him. He'd shoot his eyes out next chance he had, just for causing all this fear. "Leave it alone," she called to him in her don't-mess-with-me voice. Jack held up, waiting for it to stop. Dad planned on returning after the banquet on Saturday night. He didn't want to be away too long with Shirley needing him like she did. So in a day or so, this ringing would pass. When the kitchen phone rang later that afternoon, they both stared at it. That could be Sugar. She stared at the black, rattling instrument. He's probably in Frisco by now. She rose and answered it. She listened for a while, her eyes turning frightened, then angry. "Stop calling here." Her voice was controlled, but Jack knew she was afraid. She dropped it on the cradle. From the slump of her shoulders, he could see her fear. She had one hand on her forehead, another on her mouth. "Who is it, Mom? I'll kick his butt." "You'll do no such thing." He thought she dabbed at her eyes before she turned to sit back down. Jack ran upstairs to his room, loaded his BB gun, pumped it up, and leaned it against the wall by his bedroom door. He knew where Dad kept his hunting rifle and shotgun in the bedroom closet if he needed them. At the bottom of the stairs, he stood where he could see into the kitchen one way and another way to the front door. When she didn't hear from Sugar on Saturday morning when he promised to call, she paced the kitchen, a worried look on her face. She kept saying as much to herself as to him that everything was okay. After the association meeting, Dad would probably make the rounds at the jazz clubs in Frisco. Probably listened until the sun came up. Jack kept thinking to himself that Dad was just fine, having fun somewhere, telling jokes, laughing, and smoking cigars. He would call soon. She kept up a constant patter of reasons why he hadn't called. When the phone rang Saturday at mid-morning, she hustled to the hall extension on the second floor. She gave a cheery, "Hello?" Jack could tell by the sudden tightening of her face the voice on the other end wasn't Dad's. She held the phone in the air for a moment, then dropped it to the cradle as if it was contaminated, wiping her sweating palm on her dress. "Who was that, Mom?" Jack stood a few feet down the darkened hall. When she didn't answer, he asked again. "Just a wrong number." After church on Sunday, She paced the hall by the telephone, forgetting the time, until Jack called to her that he'd made a dinner of tuna fish sandwich.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?